All right, guys, I just want to welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we're doing our complete Week 0 preview and prediction for all 5 games going down on Saturday, August 23rd. All of these games have been broken down in full already on the channel, so we're just going to go over some quick key points with our predictions in this one. More of a consolidated episode, but still some great content. Get anything started with the game in Dublin, a ranked matchup in the Big 12, Kansas State taking on Iowa State. This is a game that I think should be very competitive, the 3-point line in favor of the Wildcats. And I think when you look at KSU, the key points for them are, what will Avery Johnson look like? He was a little shaky last year in conference play, quite inconsistent. Now he has a more expanded wide receiver room with some portal additions, to go along with guys like Jace Brown and Garrett Oakley. The run game loses DJ Giddens, but they still average 215 yards per game on the ground. Johnson's a capable runner. I think Dylan Edwards is going to have a phenomenal season, and the depth behind him provides some good guys that spell him. You have a new look offensive line. They'll be breaking in new starters. But the thing here is that Iowa State was abysmal last year when it came to defending the run. 6 games of 200-plus yards allowed. They got gashed often. They did hold up well in this matchup last season when they beat KSU at home at Jack Trice Stadium. But Iowa State consistently was allowing significant plays, 127th nationally and 60-plus yard plays allowed. Explosiveness was just not their forte when it came to defending it last year. A lot of that goes to a weak pass rush. Outside of Dominic Orange, they don't have a great defensive line. They did add some guys in the portal, though. The secondary is phenomenal. So if they can, anchor down against the run, I think Iowa State does a great job of winning this game. Guys like Jontez Williams, Jeremiah Cooper, they're phenomenal in the secondary. On the other side of things, Nick, you have a guy in Rocco Becht who, is also one of the top quarterbacks in the country. I think this is a very impressive player. Last year, he showcased his dual threat abilities, but he's losing a phenomenal amount of targets with 2 guys headed into the NFL and Jalen Knoll, Jaden Higgins. They go and get a guy in Chase Sewell, I think will be solid. And then Xavier Townsend, I think they're going to be targeting the tight ends a lot. And I think Iowa State's going to look to run the football, but Kansas State's quite well at defending the run, especially with their linebackers led by Austin Romaine, Desmond Purcell. I mean, these guys are phenomenal in that regard. And so I think they could dominate, at the line of scrimmage, and the point of attack I think is going to be favored into their way. And last year in this matchup, though, Nick, Beck, he was 13 of 35 for 137 passing, and that's with the elite receivers he had. They don't have that now. The big pass plays were avoided by Kansas State in this meeting last year. I don't see them being anything more than one-dimensional. I think Kansas State will have a little bit more balance to go for, and that's why I think that Kansas State's going to be able to win this game. I think pretty convincingly. I understand a close spread, and we do have close scores. I think it'll be a one-score game for most of the contest, but they're never going to feel threatened, I think is the way to put this one in Dublin. Kansas State's going to start 1-0.
Yeah, I certainly share the same feeling as you. I think Kansas State will be in control for most of this game. Farmageddon taking it out, moving to Europe, and having this matchup go down at the Aviva Stadium in Dublin, which has played host to some pretty good opening week matchups the last couple of years. They won the Navy, Notre Dame game a couple of years ago wasn't that great, but last year's match between Georgia Tech and Florida State was phenomenal. A couple of years before that, Northwestern and Nebraska had a really good battle go down in Dublin. I'm expecting this to be a pretty good battle between 2 teams hoping to contend in the Big 12. I like Kansas State here a lot. I think Kansas State has a good matchup potential here. I think they'll be able to run the ball effectively against what is a weak defensive line for Iowa State that struggled against the run last year. Opponents were able to get 5.35 yards per attempt on the ground last year, which was a really strong number. 19 rushing touchdowns they gave up as well last year. So Iowa State was weak against the run on the ground last year. They have some interesting pieces. I think Dom Orange is a really good leader. I think Zamir Hawk will step up and be strong at nose tackle. But I think those are more long-term projections for me. I don't think short-term they'll be able to stop the run here, which should still be a really good rushing attack for Kansas State, even if they lose some of their key players. They had over 6 yards per attempt last year on the ground, 21 rushing touchdowns. They have Dylan Edwards, who I think will be really strong for this team. Joe Jackson is a really good player. Antonio Martin was an add out of the portal that could be really solid for this team as well. I like Avery Johnson under center. I think he's a quarterback that will take a step forward and be better this year. Obviously, there were a lot of positives in the game last year, but a lot of negatives as well. He's a really good rusher as well when they use his legs. I like what he has at tight end. Garrett Oakley, a great target there. Jace Brown in the slot should be a really good target as well. I like the secondary for Iowa State. I think the secondary is certainly good. So if you're looking for a way to win this game for Kansas State, I think it's ground and pound, run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. That's the recipe for me over there in Ireland. I think there's a lot of success potentially for this Kansas State team on the ground. I like a game where they're going to go back and forth early early on, but I think Kansas State will be pretty comfortable throughout the second half and get this job done by putting some key touchdowns on the ground, chewing some clock late in this game, controlling the tempo, and finding themselves moving on to 1-0 in week 0.
Yeah, I mean, when you just look at the matchups, it seems to favor Kansas State a little bit more because I definitely think they're not going to be in long down and distances, which that would significantly favor the Cyclones secondary. I just definitely think that the pass game is going to be a big liability this year for Iowa State. They're going to be running a lot of 2 tight end slot sets, though, and I think that could certainly maybe give you an edge in physicality or potential play action as well. So I definitely don't think it's going to be a cakewalk by any means. I definitely don't think Kansas State will be all that threatened, though. Moving to the next game that's also going down in week 0, a late edition here in Idaho State, UNLV going down at 4 o'clock. This one was originally going to be going down September 13th, but they had to make accommodations for the Canelo Alvarez-Terrence Crawford boxing match. So they ended up getting this game moved up to week 0, and I think it's a good addition, at least for betting purposes, and one that we're all of a sudden now interested in. These games can kind of be fun sometimes to get the season started. You look at Idaho State. This is a team that scored 33 points per game last year. Their top 2 QBs are gone. Top 2 wide receivers are also gone. 4 of the 5 guys on the offensive line are back, though. They also returned their top runner from last season, so it's not complete hope that's lost. You have a new guy in Jordan Cook who'll be getting the start at quarterback most likely, though. He got playing time last year against Oregon State. That was really only the appearance he saw. He went 9 for 20 with 70 yards and a pick. The team averaged nearly 300 pass yards per game last season, so he has some big shoes to fill. Only about $129 on the ground. They were efficient, but not really a run-oriented team. The return of Ian Durant and Raiden Brown, Tizian Nunnally, those guys were 3 through 5 on the team in terms of receiving. So I think they certainly have an edge here when it comes to returning pass game production. As a pass-heavy team, these guys were getting plenty of targets last season. I think the biggest problem with the Bengals is their defense was abysmal last year. Nearly 38 points per game were allowed. Late in the year, they lost a game, so I think it was Eastern Washington, 77-44. Gave up 478 rushing and 10 touchdowns in that game alone. On average, they gave up 250 yards per contest per game on the ground, Nick. So this defense was just awful, especially when it comes to defending the run. And I looked at their defense. They're only getting a couple of guys back. A few of them in their secondary in terms of starters. The run defense was awful. Now they're only going to return to one linebacker, Nathan Reynolds, who got snaps last year. Other than that, everyone else in the front 7 is mostly gone that saw snaps. The secondary wasn't all that bad, 215 pass yards per game allowed. That was on only 26 attempts by the opposition per game, though. His ground game was such free yardage. The thing about UNLV is this ground game last year was phenomenal, but now you insert Dan Mullen, who inherits a transfer-heavy roster, so it's completely different from last year. I think the identity will stay the same, though. You have 2 quarterbacks. Alex Orji is a phenomenal runner. Anthony Colandrea comes over from Virginia. I think he'll be the clear quarterback. He has significantly better passing abilities. And if you look at this class top to bottom, we're not going to sit here and bore you with all the names, but it's a pretty good transfer class, I thought, from UNLV. At one point, all of these guys have made some type of play at a premier program, some notable adds on defense as well. I'm kind of concerned, though, because a 25-point line, that's a kind of a big line, right? And I think UNLV should easily cover, but the case is simple for why they might not. They could struggle early. I could see Idaho State making some big plays in the first half to score 14 points. UNLV struggling to move the ball, and again, a transfer-heavy team's first game together. Even though it seems like it's going to be free yards on the ground, it could lead to the game flying by, chewing up the clock. And if Idaho State indeed can score some points early, I think they're going to have no issue covering. So this is what I'm honestly going to probably stay away from, Nick. I think the outcome seems simple. I don't think it's a guarantee, though. I would be scared if UNLV doesn't get off to a hot start, and that's what's just keeping me weary of not wanting to pull the trigger on the Rebels to cover. Idaho State last year, they played from behind a lot. They did so quite well, so I think the over might be in play, especially if you expect the Rebels to start hot. So I'm certainly worried. I ended up picking a 25-point victory, which is a slight cover for the underdogs. This one has me worried, Nick. Are you confident at all in your pick?
No, I'm not super confident. I do think this is a UNLV team that's a brand new look team that really, if they don't start very fast, this could be a problem. I think they're going to run the ball a lot. I agree with that assessment, which will certainly keep the clock moving and kind of get this game going at a faster pace. This Idaho State team was horrible against the run last year. They were horrible on defense. They got torched over and over again, particularly on the ground. And when I look at what UNLV can do on the ground, I think this is a rushing attack that'll be really solid. Last year, this offense was averaging 5.4 points per game, 5.47 yards per attempt on the ground, 29 rushing touchdowns for this offense last year. Obviously, a completely new-looked unit under Dan Mullen, who I think was a phenomenal hire, by the way. I think he'll be really good at UNLV. I like what he was able to do, kind of weighting his decision-making was on TV for a while, and he waited for a job that he felt would be good. Jadanian Thomas comes back for this team. He was a pretty solid runner for them last year, almost 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns for Thomas. They're relying on him as the number one back. Jalen Glover was a pretty interesting add out of the portal at running back. I think he could really be solid. He was at Utah, where he had some success in previous years. Kevon Lee was another interesting name they added at running back who could be solid. He was at Mississippi State, getting some solid stuff done on the ground for them. I think Anthony Colanderio would be a really solid starter for this team. Previously at UVA, 61% comp rate last year, 2,100 yards passing. Had 13 touchdowns, but did have 11 picks, so something to keep an eye on concerning. Alex Orji is a really good running quarterback if you want to use him in certain sets, kind of play him and get him playing to his strengths. He's not really a passer. He hasn't really developed an arm at all, but if you want to use him in certain different looks, get him out there on the field to get him involved in the rushing attack, I think they can certainly do so at UNLV and find a way to get that done. A completely new looked wide receiving core, which I think will struggle a little bit. The O-line is also a completely revamped unit, but I do think they can find some success and maybe play decently together here. I don't expect Idaho State to put a ton of pressure on the quarterback, so whoever is starting under center will have some room to kind of develop and get the opportunity to build a pocket around them and pick out the passes if they are going to throw the ball or run the ball. I like UNLV here to win this game comfortably. I have them covering on this list, but I could see them struggling like you alluded to there and not being able to put up points on the board early with a new look team. I think Dan Mullen's a great coach, though. He's going to want to go out and put on a show week 0 in Sin City, which is a very cool thing. This game got moved, thrown on there really quickly late in the cycle. A very intriguing game for people that want to kind of throw some money on it.
My biggest concern is just I feel like if I knew they would score 60 points, I feel like they'll cover comfortably, but I expect them to be in that 40 to 50 range in Idaho State. If they score, 1 to 3 touchdowns, I'm pretty confident they're going to cover. I think that's a pretty high likelihood that happens. So maybe I'll reconsider closer to kickoff, but right now I'm probably going to stay away. Moving to Fresno State in Kansas, this is a little interesting game here as well, where the line seems to keep moving down. I've seen it between 11, 12 and a half. And I think the total's kind of, a number that hasn't really moved a whole lot at 50 and a half. And we looked at this game the other day, Nick, and we were really intrigued by how this rushing attack should likely dominate. Fresno State, they were pretty good last year on the ground. It was a good run defense, but they did struggle against some of the tougher attacks. And I think this is going to be one that's in that category. Daniel Highshaw with Sean Williams is going to be a phenomenal running back duo this year. Jalen Daniels is going to be a phenomenal quarterback. He's a multi-year starter for Kansas, a team that's also breaking in a lot of new pass catchers. I don't expect them to be all that aggressive through the air. I think it's going to be a run-heavy approach in this one. And I think that they're certainly going to get an edge there because they have a really good offensive line, one of the tops in the country. And, Fresno's replacing a lot of guys up front on their defensive line. They do return a couple of nice pass rushers, though, like Corey Foreman. So, I don't think complete hope is lost. I don't think they're going to get completely annihilated. I definitely think that Kansas will most likely be ahead of the sticks most of this contest. And on the other side of the ball, you have Kansas who's replacing a bunch of corners. It's a transfer-heavy defense that's also quite stout in the trenches, though, due to some transfers and guys that they return. A lot of veterans up front for the Jayhawks. E.J. Warner transfers over, 3-year starter at 2 different programs. 37 career interceptions, though. It's a pretty wide number, as he has a pretty bad turnover problem, it appears, and going up against a team in Kansas that played quite stout against some tough offenses last year. I don't think it's going to fold here, especially since Fresno, they're only returning, I think, it's either one or no guys. They had 100-plus yards receiving last year. I think Josiah Freeman's the only one who had over 100 yards, and he'll be the focal point. And it's a transfer-heavy group at wide receiver for the Bulldogs, and a lot of those guys are coming from JUCO. I think one comes from Louisville but has no stats to his name. So it's an inexperienced bunch. I don't think they're in a position to take advantage of a young KU secondary that's completely retooling itself. So that's their one area I think they could thrive in, Nick. I just don't think they're going to be able to take advantage of it. So I think this will be a pretty lofty score. Don't really understand this line. I feel like it should probably be closer to like a 17-point line in favor of KU. So I'm going to hammer them 31-13. I know you also have them scoring only 13 via a cover as well. I think Kansas is a pretty good bet here.
Yeah, I think Kansas is a pretty solid bet here. I think this is going to be a matchup of two teams that are going to run the ball over and over again, chew that clock, and kind of find a way to dominate on the ground. I just think Kansas is a better rushing attack, and at the end of the day, they'll force a turnover to force a stop key and put Fresno State in a tough spot. I do think Fresno State will score some points, but I think Kansas will ultimately cover the spread, albeit barely for me, based off some of the books that I'm looking at. Depending on where you find it, I have a 15-point win, so there you go, covering the spread there. I think this is a Kansas team that's really solid running the ball. It starts with Jalen Daniels, who is a really good quarterback. He had some issues at times last year, but I think he's still a very valuable asset on the ground. 440 yards rushing, 4.7 yards per attempt and 6 scores last year for him. So that was really impressive. As long as he cuts down on the turnovers, which he was able to do in the second half of the season last year, I think this could be a really solid offense outside of the game against Baylor where he had 2 picks. But prior to that, he was pretty clean, was able to clean up the turnovers after having a bunch early in the season. He got more accurate throughout the season. He got more comfortable in the pocket. I do think the passing attack for Kansas will eventually come into shape. I like some of the players they add in the portal, but for me, it's hard to rely on a revamped portal unit for a week 0 game. I just can't really trust the passing attack to light it up week 0. I think they'll run the ball effectively here. I like the O-line for Kansas. They return a bunch of different guys that were really solid last year, added an interesting piece at right tackle, and Enrique Cruz, who I think could be a really solid starter for them from Syracuse. So I'm not really worried about their possibility to run the ball. When I look at Fresno State, this is a team that's going to have to run the ball as well. They struggled at times last year running the ball. 3.3 yards per attempt is not a good number at all for this Fresno State offense, and I think they're going to have to try to find a way to get some success on the ground. Bryson Dolson was good for them last year as a true freshman, but he's the number 1 back. He's got to step up. E.J. Warner, I don't think is a great quarterback coming over from Rice, having a pretty bad season last year. Josiah Freeman's his only receiver that really has any sort of meaningful grabs. I think this offense will just stutter. They'll struggle. Warner had 13 picks last year, just not really impressive numbers for me. I just don't think this Fresno State offense was that great in general last year. I think the defenses will have a decent day. I like both defenses have solid pieces, but again, I like the Kansas defense just a little bit more here. For me, this feels like just a play where I'm going with a team that's just better on paper, and I think they'll be able to convincingly, go out there early on, dominate. Maybe some late points for Fresno State will make this game a little bit closer, but I like the rushing attack for Kansas. I like the run defense and the secondary, even if it's retooled for Kansas, to step up and have a pretty solid day in Lawrence.
Now we'll move to a game that'll be starting 30 minutes later on CBS Sports Network. Western Kentucky, Sam Houston State, also a conference game going down in week 0. And this one's interesting because neither team returns much at all. Only 6 total starters. Hunter Watson's one of them for the Bearcats, though. This guy was pretty solid at quarterback. It was a run-heavy offense, which, could be ideal going up against a Western Kentucky run defense that was 131st in the nation last year. I mean, they were just abysmal, getting gashed by everybody. You got to ask yourself, is Sam Houston State in position to take advantage of that? They're returning only 2 guys up front. Everyone from the running back room's gone. Elijah Green comes over from UNC. He's like a 5th-year senior at this point, only really had 1 year of notable production. He brought a guy in from Mary Hardin Baylor. And then Landon Brown, the running back 3, those 2 guys don't have any career touches. So it's a very youthful running back room for the most part. You do have 2 solid receivers in Quavez Humphreys and Phoenix Jackson, I think, are going to get a lot of targets. So it's not all doom and gloom for the offense. Problem is, they had 5 games in the back half of the year where they scored under 20 points. That included a 31-14 loss to Western Kentucky. The offense just could not score last year. Now you're going to lose everybody. Not much to really feel confident about either in terms of portal ads. And as bad as the Hilltoppers were against the run last year, they completely revamped their D-line in the portal, and that typically means what you saw last year you can throw out the window. Doesn't mean they can't get worse, but I'm assuming they're going to be better. Can't get much worse than you saw last year, I would assume. So I think Western Kentucky, they're going to be much better against the run in this game. I don't think Sam Houston State's really in position to take advantage of that weakness that their opposition has. While on the other hand, I think Western Kentucky is in a much better spot to take advantage of Sam Houston State returning 0 starters on defense. It was a very good unit last year, but no one's returning. Only a couple of guys who got snaps last year are back. Western Kentucky themselves only gets 1 starter back on offense, but I think Maverick McIver is a perfect fit at quarterback for this system. I love the receivers they have. Matthew Henry comes over after a great year from Western Illinois. Cody Epps from BYU has had a pretty good career. Katie Hutchinson's a veteran of the program. I think they're going to come in and they're going to click much easier than the opposition will, Nick. And so this is a tough game to predict because really there is no starters coming back, and these are brand new teams, a 10-point line. I think it's a pretty solid one. It's going to be tough to cover, but I think they're going to win this one in blowout fashion. I think they'll get hot in that second half. Sam Houston State will not be able to compete with their offensive woes, so I have them covering and barely hitting the over in this one, but you see a much more competitive contest.
Yeah, this game's been tough for me to predict all week. I've been going back and forth while doing my notes because I'm really struggling with this one because you're right. You're getting basically 2 new teams here that are revamping just about everything. The Sam Houston offense doesn't really return a whole lot. The Western Kentucky offense doesn't really return anybody. A brand new defense for Western Kentucky and a brand new defense for Sam Houston. Really, the only unit out of these four here that returns enough production to really look at and say, hey, that's some decent production, is Sam Houston's offense, which just wasn't good last year. They returned some pieces. They scored 23.8 points per game last year, 4.2 yards per attempt on the ground, just under 5 yards per play. They get back their quarterback in Hunter Watson, who I thought was a decent quarterback last year for them. Certainly a good dual threat option. He had 650 yards on the ground and 9 scores. 1,800 yards passing, 12 touchdowns, and 8 picks. I think Watson's a good player. I like what he can do. Humphreys and Phoenix are two solid returners at wide receiver. They lost their whole running back room. Elijah Green hasn't really done anything in his career. Shane Porter has not been great. Alton McCaskill hasn't been great either. So they return, a bunch of portal different guys at running back. When you look at their defense, this defense was absolutely phenomenal last year for Sam Houston. They were a really strong unit. They were holding opponents to 20 points per game, below 4 yards per attempt on the ground, below 5 yards per play. But they replaced just about everybody. A bunch of different transfers they hope could be solid. Trey Harris, Jace Arnold, CJ Brown in the secondary they think could be really solid. AJ Sargent, Keelan Cox on the defensive line they hope can be key pieces here. When I look at Western Kentucky, right, the offense brings in Maverick McIver, who I think is a really good quarterback, jumping over from Abilene Christian. Lavelle Wright at running back could be solid. George Hart returns at running back. They bring in a bunch of different pieces, in terms of wide receivers. They bring back Katie Hutchinson in the slot, who was really solid. Revamped O-lines for both teams as well. For some reason, I think that this Western Kentucky team will struggle a little bit early on. They'll misclick. They won't fire on full cylinders. This is a tough system that Tyson Hilton runs, so rebuilding the entire offense isn't really necessarily super easy to do. I think the defense for Sam Houston will plug in a little bit easier and have a solid day, and I think Hunter Watson will be able to run the ball and kind of put the team in a good position, getting some solid first downs. We'll probably hit his guys a couple of times here and there to get some key yardage and pick up some moments. I do think Western Kentucky still wins the game. I still think this is a better team on paper, but I think Sam Houston keeps it close. It'll be a dogfight back and forth before the Hilltoppers pull off the home win on week 0. It's a very intriguing matchup. I'm glad this game got moved to week 0 because you get a good matchup of two Conference USA opponents on CBS Sports Network. But for me, I just feel like Sam Houston's defense will click sooner, get the job done, and be a stronger unit, hold, maybe force a turnover or two against Western Kentucky. While the Hilltoppers, I think they'll be a great team in Conference USA come the end of the season. I'm just not buying them putting it all together so early on. So I'll take this cover from Sam Houston here. I'll take WKU outright, though.
Now we go to the nightcap on primetime CBS, Stanford in Hawaii. This one's important to us because me and Nick have a friendly wager. We seem to always do this when it comes to Hawaii games for some reason, but it's really fun and exciting. I'm obviously going to go with Stanford. Nick will go with Hawaii. I definitely think this will be a competitive game. The spread's flipped. It was -2 Stanford. Now the Rainbow Warriors are favored by 2. I think when you look at the stat sheet, obviously neither of these teams were exactly great. It's all about matchups, right? The Stanford offense, they're going to be plugging in an ex-4-star and E.J. Brown now at quarterback. The run game showed signs of life at times last year. They're getting back their top 3 runners. Sam Roush at tight end, I think, is going to command a lot of targets this year. C.J. Williams, I think, is going to be a guy who can, really take advantage of a secondary that is replacing some of their top guys in the cornerback room. They do return their top safeties, led by Peter Manuma. That is Hawaii. Elijah Palmer was also great in coverage out of the slot. Pass rush was pretty respectable in the Mountain West. So Hawaii's, playing with some solid things to note when it comes to their defense, but overall they do also lose a good amount of starters. And I think that Stanford, they should be able to take advantage of a run defense that was quite poor last year. They had 5 games of 230 plus yards they allowed. This is definitely a weaker opponent they'll be playing in Stanford. So we'll see what happens in that regard, but I definitely think that Stanford's going to be able to impose their will when it comes to more of a balanced approach. Well, Hawaii, we're excited to see what Micah Alejado can do at quarterback. This guy in his last start had 500-plus yards and 5 scores in the season finale. That happened to be his first career start as well. And, that's a lot of praise that we're going to give him because obviously that's highly impressive. It was all against a bad New Mexico defense, though. He does return 2 of his top pass catchers, Nick Senecal, Pavel Ashlock. These guys were both very productive last year. The run-and-shoot offense only had 97 yards per game on the ground last year. So it's going to be a one-dimensional offense, it appears. Stanford's got much more depth and size in the trenches than we're accustomed to seeing over the last couple of years. In their secondary, though, it was abysmal, right? So this is going to be the matchup that determines the whole game. Who's going to do better when it comes to Stanford's secondary against this receiving group? I think with the return of 5 starters, despite being 131st nationally last year against the pass, they're going to ascend this year into about a top 80 unit, I would say. Guys like Scott Edwards, Colin Wright, The addition of Jordan Washington in the portal is great. So I'm very excited for this game. I definitely think that the edges are going to lie with Stanford, and they're going to win this game at the end of the day. And another thing to note, Nick, is that just Hawaii's just not been very good in these opening games. 50-point favorites last year. They were up a touchdown going into the fourth quarter against an abysmal Delaware State team. They lost to Stanford Week 2, 2023 in Hawaii in a game that was very similar in terms of a spread. We had, a friendly wager on that Vanderbilt game back in 2022. Vandy beat them by 53 points. So Hawaii doesn't really seem to take that home field advantage they have and put it to good use, and that's why Hawaii is getting so much love in games like this, and I'm just not buying it.
This is a interesting matchup for me. Me and picking Hawaii in week 0 is like a bad girlfriend. I keep going back to it even though the outcome never really works for me. But this year I think it's going to be different. I'm falling for it again, but I think this is different. And I feel a lot more confident this year about Hawaii than I do in most years. I think this is an opportunity for Hawaii to really step up and get a win over a Power 4 team, albeit the worst Power 4 team. And that's part of it. Stanford's the worst Power 4 team in my opinion this year in college football. They have a very shallow roster that's missing a lot of talent. The defense was absolutely abysmal last year, 33.7 points per game given up. They bring back some of those guys, but they just weren't good at all. They didn't really bring in anybody in the portal. Obviously, they have a whole tough situation with the interim head coach and the offseason firing their coach late in the cycle. I don't envy Andrew Luck's job as the GM of Stanford. It's certainly a very difficult job with Frank Reich being the interim head coach for a year. I just can't see the guys buying in and supporting that vision. A revamped, passing attack with a bunch of different guys at wide receiver, who I don't know if any of these guys are really going to step up and be good. Micah Ford coming back at running back is certainly a good get, and then bringing back Sam Roush at tight end. He's obviously a big physical tight end. Elijah Brown gets to start. Previously, a Matter Day high school product. He's a guy that they hope could be really solid. He was a 4-star coming out of high school, but I just don't know if I've seen him really step up and be ready to get that going as a quarterback in his a big start opportunity for him. When I look at Hawaii here, there's a lot to like for me with Hawaii this year. I think their quarterback, Michael Lehido, is a really solid asset. I think he's a really good quarterback that can step up and be good. He was phenomenal in that matchup against New Mexico. He's phenomenal the week before in relief against Utah State, going 11 of 12 for over 100 yards and a touchdown in that one. I like what he returns with his top 2 pass catchers coming back, Ashlock and Consele, who I think are really good players at the wide receiver Z and slot position. The O-line should be a pretty physical unit by Hawaii standards. The defense for Hawaii last year, it was bad as well, 26 points per game, giving up 4.67 yards per attempt on the ground. If Stanford wants to win this game, they have to run the ball, chew clock, and find a way to develop, while meanwhile Hawaii's going to want to try and attack a weak secondary for Stanford that I'm not sure has gotten much better. That's the key to success here. Can Hawaii attack this secondary, put up a lot of big chunk plays, blitz them early on, and kind of attack those deficiencies, even if they did replace some of the assets in the secondary for Stanford here. I like what Hawaii can do. I think this is an opportunity for Hawaii to get a huge win. I think the quarterback edge is a massive advantage. I think the secondary for Hawaii is a pretty decent unit as well. I think Hawaii is going to find a way to succeed with these wide receivers that they return, succeed with a quarterback they return, and Stanford just will be playing from behind and won't have enough answers, forcing Elijah Brown to make a mistake or two, having some turnovers, and getting Hawaii a close key win on the Big Island. I'm excited this game's on national television on CBS. So it's really good to kind of highlight the Rainbow Warriors, a team that I think is trending upwards in the Mountain West and should make a bowl game under Timmy Chang this year. I like what they can do, certainly overall. I'm taking the Rainbow Warriors here. I'm going to jump with it. I'm going to continue to do it. I think it's going to pay off this year for me. I like what Hawaii has. I'm very intrigued. This is definitely the second best matchup on the slate for me for week 0. I'm very excited to sit down and watch this one. Can't wait to see it go down at 7:30 on Saturday.
Definitely think Hawaii might have a slight edge at quarterback, but that's all it is a slight one. And I think in the trenches, they're certainly going to be at a big disadvantage, and that's where the game's going to be won at the end of the day. This will be a fun one. Should come down to the wire. That's going to wrap up our episode for week 0. Happy to be back. Very glad. This slate is actually a pretty enjoyable one, I would say. Obviously, for people like us, we love every college football game that's played. So even if you're a casual, though, there's a lot going down. There's some money that can be made with these bets. And, of course, it all gets started with a ranked matchup in Ireland. And then it caps off in Hawaii with a nice competitive contest. I think that'll be it for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.